Cain is deified.
Soul Reaver. For me, this game stands on a pedestal next to Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie as one of the most memorable and enjoyable games from my childhood. I first learned about this game from one of those demo CDs on Dreamcast. It's the only one I remember from it too. I remember it being little more than Raziel in a room with a couple of those butt crack demons. Even that small demo left such an impression on me that when I found it in a Toys R Us later, I begged my dad for it. And I never asked for anything, ever, which is probably why he got it for me.
Where are you?
This game always felt like the video game equivalent of 9 Inch Nails for me. The fact that this game even exists is kind of interesting because it's both a spin-off and a sequel. See, this whole series got started with Legacy of Kain Blood Omen, which is a pretty standard 90s RPG. I thought about explaining this in the thing, but because I never played it, I didn't know what I was talking about, so I'll just read you the story off of Wikipedia here, just so you get an idea of what Blood Omen is. Okay, here's the story for Blood Omen. During a journey, the human nobleman Kain is ambushed and killed by a band of assassins. Mortanius offers him the chance to exact revenge. Kain ascends, heedless of the cost, and awakens as a vampire. Once he kills his attackers, Mortanius tells him that while they were instrumental to his death, they were not the ultimate cause. In search of the truth to cure a vampiric disease, Kain travels to the Pillars of Nosgoth. There, Ariel explains he has to destroy the Circle of Nine before he can realize peace. Kain begins by tracking down and killing Nup Raptor, and then confronts Malik, but their duel ends in a stalemate. To defeat Malik, Kain solicits the advice of the Oracle of Nosgoth. The Oracle forewarns him of legions of Nemesis and instructs him to seek out Vorador, Malik's old adversary. When the two meet, Vorador welcomes Kain and offers his assistance, but urges the fledgling to embrace vampirism and refrain from interfering in the affairs of mankind. Haunted by the elder vampire who serves as an example that he will become if he fails to find a cure of what he will become, Kain persists, and in a decisive showdown, Vorador vanquishes Malik, while Kain kills Bane the Druid and Dejul the Energist. Later, after he slays Azimuth the Planer and recovers a time-streaming device, Ariel informs Kain that he must prioritize the war against the Nemesis, whose armies threaten to conquer Willendorf. Kain convinces King Otmar to rally his troops against the legions in a final stand, but the battle proves disastrous. Otmar perishes, Willendorf forces are overwhelmed, and Kain, cornered, uses the time-streaming device to escape. He emerges 50 years in the past and kills the younger version of the Nemesis from this era. However, when Kain returns to the present day, he discovers that William's murder has sparked a renewed vampire purge. The Oracle of Nosgoth, revealed to be Mobius the Time-Streamer, a member of the Circle, leads the genocidal crusade and, having masterminded Kain's actions from the outset, consummates his trap by executing Vorador. Kain kills Mobius, but is left the last of his kind. At the Pillars, he witnesses Mortanius arguing with Anakroth the Alchemist, who reveals that Mortanius is a guardian and culpable for both Ariel and Kain's death. Seduced by the dark entity, Mortanius was unwillingly controlled and forced to kill Ariel. To correct the imbalance, he created Kain, a creature potent enough to destroy the Circle. Mortanius slays Aaron Colorother and then succumbs to possession from the dark entity, whom Kain defeats. With only one pillar left unrestored, Kain reaches an epiphany. He himself is the final insane Circle member. Ariel's unwitting successor as guardian of balance, cold in the brief interval between her death and the Pillars' corruption. The cure to vampirism, which he sought, is his own death. Got all that? Okay, now forget it, because they don't talk about any of that in this game. Cut to Soul Reaver a couple years later. First off, this game isn't even about Kain. In fact, he only shows up twice. Once after the first boss fight.
Ha! That's right, belly punch for the win.
And again at the very end of the game. Kain, where are you? There you are. Secondly, they introduced the concept of two different realms, the physical realm, the one we belong to, and the spectral realm, sort of like a spirit realm. Then there are only two characters from Blood Omen, and one of them is the main character. It's not even so much about them, it's about Raziel and all his brothers, the new characters. The game is such a far cry from Blood Omen, I don't know how you couldn't call it a spin-off. And if they'd left Soul Reaver alone after this game, all it would have been was a spin-off. But thanks to Soul Reaver 2 weaving this story with Blood Omen, it has become the sequel. Okay, so if this game's not about Kain, what is it about?
I am Raziel, firstborn of his lieutenants.
In the introduction of the game, Raziel surpasses Kain in the evolution of the vampire race, and it appears Kain doesn't like this. So what does he do about it? He breaks Raziel's wings and throws him off a cliff. Even at the age of 12, I could see that was an awfully petty thing for the leader of the entire vampire race to do. Anyway, Raziel tumbles, turns, and burns all the way down into the abyss, and that's the intro. One of the most memorable in my opinion, but that could be due to the excellent writing, which I'll get back to.
I know you, Raziel. You are worthy.
You're resurrected thousands of years later by some tentacle god who, I guess, has decided he's finally waited long enough after seeing millennia of Nosgoth's degradation. I'm not sure why he waited so long, but that's not so important. What is important is that you're alive again. He tells you that because no one in Nosgoth is dying anymore, on account of basically everyone being vampires by now, their souls can't pass on and the Wheel of Fate can't turn. He doesn't go into much more detail about what the Wheel of Fate is, but I assume it's like the Circle of Life. After completing a bit of the tutorial, he drops a bomb on you. Because you're no longer a vampire, but a soul reaver, instead of drinking blood to regain health, you have to eat souls.
You are changed. Your bloodthirst is replaced by a deeper need. You have become a devourer of souls.
Now for me, this was a major power trip throughout the game, because it's like you're killing someone and then killing them again by consuming their very soul. It's really satisfying to watch an enemy that gave you trouble in life try to get away only to be sucked in. There's one other thing though. Stop! The gameplay for this is actually pretty innovative. There are two realms, the material or physical realm, and the immaterial or spectral realm. And they both behave differently. There are different rules for each realm, which is what I think makes this game stand out so much. In the material realm, you can interact with objects that are there. You can open doors, move blocks, pick up weapons, do more physical things. In the spectral realm, you can't interact with the world, but this also means that the world can't interact with you. So where water would normally kill you, now you can just walk through it. Different paths also open up as the world shifts and changes, which has some pretty interesting implications for puzzles, which we'll get to later. Now that I think about it, that's actually double duty on world building, which is pretty impressive. They definitely make use of the two realms idea very well. We'll start with the way they handle life and death. This is one of the first games I can remember where you don't die. In order to properly explain how this works, I'll have to go into a bit more detail about the whole eating souls thing. So instead of a life bar, you get like a soul spiral, is what it looks like. And that's obviously powered by souls. You eat souls, and your life bar or your soul spiral, that's just what I decided to call it for this video, get off my case about it. It fills up, right? Just like a life bar. When you eat enough souls and it's filled up, it'll glow. When the soul spiral or life bar is glowing, you can go from the spectral realm to the physical realm, but only after it's filled up. And while you're in the physical realm, that spiral slowly depletes, so you have to keep killing and eating in order to stay in the physical realm. That is until you actually get the Soul Reaver.
From this moment and ever afterward, you and this blade are inextricably bound.
Then if you're at full, you'll stay there. But if you take any damage, the Soul Reaver goes away and your life is back on the clock. If your life force runs out from either of not eating enough or taking too much damage, instead of dying and reloading, you just return to the spectral realm, and there's usually a fountain of souls to get you right back into it. One thing I really like about this is when you're in the spectral realm, time in the physical realm is frozen. So when you re-enter, the enemy is right where you left him and no one else has respawned. Pushing the wrong buttons now, I gotta be careful, okay? That freaking gets me every time! I'm gonna get complaints about how loud I'm being, and I am sorry. But KhasAdun, what if you run out of life in the spectral realm? Then you're resurrected back in the beginning room and you gotta walk all the way back to where you were, and everything is respawned. I think that's a pretty good punishment, kinda like Dark Souls. You won't have to redo the puzzles, you just gotta make the trek all the way back, which is made easier through warp gates. The only problem I have with the warp gates is it feels like they try to hide them from you. Some of them are off in a direction you know you don't need to go. For instance, I know I need to go to this massive cathedral. It wouldn't be here if I didn't need to go into it. But if you go around this corner, kill these bad guys, climb these rocks, you're rewarded with a warp gate. I don't know, I kind of feel like a fast travel point shouldn't be an exploration reward considering how much time it can take to walk to the far edge of the map. But whatever. As for the combat, the actual fighting is pretty basic, but how you dispatch vampires can vary. You have to use different means for different types of vampires. The most effective way is to just impale them. You can rip a spear off the wall and throw it at them in a sneak attack.
Oh, Here we go.
Or, once they've been slapped silly, you can run them through, Vlad the Impaler style. Well, actually, Vlad's style was a little extreme for this game, so maybe not that, but... you can also throw them onto wall spikes. Hey, I found some big spikes. Should we hang them on the wall? Sure. It's not like some horrible demon is gonna show up and... Oh. No! Then there's sunlight, which works on everyone. Then there's water. That's what killed him in the first place, but some vampires are immune to water, which is a trait gained from their father, your brother. But no one, and I mean no one, is immune to being blown to bits by the Soul Reaver itself. Boom! I really appreciate that. Another way to kill vampires is with the use of glyphs. A glyph is acquired by solving a puzzle somewhere in Nosgoth. Usually even the puzzle is pretty out of the way. Once you solve the puzzle, a giant stone golem presents you with a new glyph. There's the fire glyph, sunlight glyph, water glyph, stone glyph, force glyph, and sound glyph. They're all the same basic animation and they all do the same basic thing. Kill vampires, but they're pretty powerful. They work on a charge-based system, so as you go around Nosgoth in both the physical and spectral realm, you'll see these weird 5th grade looking graphic design things floating around. Those are what you need to cast the glyph. I like that system. Luckily they respawn, so it's not like you'll only get so many charges throughout the game. The only real problem I have with the way they handle glyphs is that, true to fashion, they're way out of your way. If you want a glyph, you're gonna have to do some exploring. The reason I have a problem with that is that these glyphs are a pretty significant part of the game, or at least they would be if I cared enough to go get them, but because they're so far out of the way, there's not much reason to go after them. You don't need them to complete the game. Sure, it is something that rewards exploration, and it gives you a reason to revisit areas, but I think they just made it too convenient to not bother, which is a real shame because the glyphs I did get were housed in some of the most breathtaking areas of the game. But if you can't even find these places, and it's not even worth your time to do so, who's gonna go? I feel like a lot of people missed out on some of the highlights of this game because it was much too convenient to just ignore it. I think the best way to do the glyphs would have been to make an obvious but optional path on the way out of a boss's territory, and you need the power you just got to acquire the glyph. That way it's still optional, but you're actually given the option of getting it at a reasonable time. And it would be a great way to show off your new power. You could also throw in the use of old powers too. The bosses are sequential, and hey, you actually get the glyph as you play through the game. See what I mean by how significant this part of the game is that most people, myself included, just skip? This would have felt even more fleshed out if they just handled the glyph distribution a little differently. Okay, now on to the things I like about this game. Everything artistic is great. We'll start with the dialogue, since that stood out to me the most. The dialogue is some of the best I've heard in a game. They don't assume you made it out with only a high school degree, unless you're from a country that doesn't dumb down its education, but maybe I'm a sucker for fancy language. However, unlike a lot of books and some other artsy games or movies, the dialogue isn't fancy just for the sake of being fancy. It doesn't feel like it's shoved so far up its own ass that if you were to look in there, you'd see Violet Crawley from Downton Abbey trying to claw her way out.
I don't even know what that means, but it sounds almost as peculiar as you look.
It uses context well so that you actually learn some new words instead of just get confused about what's going on. I really appreciate that kind of writing. One line that always stuck with me was when the Tentacle God is teaching you about your new wall climbing abilities you get after defeating Zephon.
Like his vampire spawn, you're able to scale certain walls which are otherwise impassable, but only in the physical realm. In the spirit world, these insubstantial edifices will not support you.
Everyone in the game talks like this, and I love it. I'm not sure if the art style is as good as I think it is, or if nostalgia's just getting in the way. Obviously the game's aged, but I don't think it's aged too poorly, because to me it's still so visually appealing. The atmosphere is intoxicating. As for the art direction of the material realm, I think it perfectly nails that post-apocalyptic vampiric world feel that is essential for a game set in a post-apocalyptic vampiric world. The buildings have really great gothic architecture, but it's all in ruins, and there's almost no, if any, plant life, which really makes this world feel dead. I love it. The spectral realm, on the other hand, feels very ethereal. It's all blue, but not in a bad way. They didn't just tint the screen blue. They made everything different shades of blue. It feels like a spirit world, and I think it provides a nice fantasy-like contrast to the ruined, sometimes industrial feel of the material realm. Now on to the music. Being the huge 9 Inch Nails fan that I am, I think it goes without saying that I love the music in this game. I think it suits the game better than what I would have imagined if I'd seen the game without music at all. Kurt Harlan, the game's lead composer, did some really cool experimental albums back in the early 90s. When he found that they were making a game that would need some creepy, ethereal music, he knew exactly what they had in mind. Not only did he write music for each area of the map, but he wrote a different variation for each realm. So there's a song for the sunlight glyph area and a different version of that song for the same area in the spectral realm, and so on. That's a lot of music, and it all works beautifully. It would have been so easy, I think, for them to have just done what most games do and get some background music that would have suited the game well enough, not have been particularly memorable, just kind of bland. I think that would have totally changed the way the game feels. I even wrote a song inspired by the music in this game, which you can hear in the intro and outro of my Let's Play series of Soul Reaver 1, 2, and Defiance. You can also click here to hear the whole song. Now onto the story. The story's a little complicated, but for now I'll just stick with what happens in this game. When you wake up, the tentacle god tells you that no one in Nosgoth is dying anymore and it's all Kane's fault. Hey, I remember that guy threw me into this abyss in the first place, and that really hurt. So we already have reason enough to dislike the guy. So they do a great job of setting up your goal in the first couple minutes. In order to reach Kane, you're gonna need some new powers. The only way to get them is to hunt down your brethren and eat their souls. Each brother you encounter gives you a reason, or 5, as to why they think you suck. Then you have a boss battle.
Come on now, Kaya. Come on. A treat. A nice burger. I have a hamburger for you this time. I'm so sorry about that gate thing again. I slipped. My hand slipped. It was nothing. Please, come, eat your hamburger.
At the end, you eat their soul and gain their specific power. Malkaya can walk through bars. Rahab can swim in water. Zafan, well, you'll see. Anyway, you go through each brother's territory, fighting their unique brood spawn, solving puzzles along the way, then at the end you get a climactic boss fight and a new power. This is great pacing. You meet Kane twice in the game. The first time you meet him, you fight, then he laughs at you and disappears. Then a ghost lady with half her face missing shows up and tells you that there's way more to this whole story than you can see right now. I thought I understood what she meant by that when I first played this game, but boy was I wrong. In the coming games you'll realize she means there was a lot. So much that by the end, the act of hunting down your brothers would seem so trivial, it's hard to believe they devoted an entire game to it. But more on that in the next reviews. Well, the game carries this simple theme of invade brothers' territory, kill, gain power. They don't really give you much more information until the very end of the game during the final confrontation with Kane, who also tells you that there's way more to the story. And there are these mirrors or something that you look into to see glimpses into the future, and it does look like there's a long way to go. Without spoiling too much, at the very end of the game, you meet a new character who sets up the next game, and he's a major player in the whole series. So story-wise, the game is actually kinda light compared to what's to come. This game is really just a setup for the next two. Okay, now on to the stuff I didn't like. First, a small gripe. It's not a huge problem, just a kind of an annoyance. When you load the game up, you don't continue where you left off. You start way back in the beginning room, and you have to make your way all the way back to where you were. Sometimes you don't even remember which way you went, and because it's so easy to miss portals, you'll often find yourself spending more time running through the world than you'd like. That's my small gripe. Now on to the big one. There's only one aspect of this game I really didn't like, and that's not too bad for a game this old. It's the puzzles. I didn't like the puzzles at all. They're not all bad, but I think some decisions that were made on how they were used could have been thought out better. The things I liked about the puzzles were that sometimes you had to complete puzzles to unlock power-ups. One that I remember specifically was that you had to use blocks with holes in them to direct airflow through a cathedral, which would put pressure on some crystal things and break them. By the way, if that makes no sense, that's the kind of logic surrounding every single puzzle in almost the entire series, not just this game. That one was pretty cool, but the rest are pretty bad. Especially near the end of the game where you have to solve a puzzle, which opened up the next room, where you have to solve another puzzle, which opened up another room with, yep, you guessed it, another puzzle. This is where I would have stopped playing had I not been doing a whole series on it. Now you may wonder, if I didn't like doing puzzles in order to get to more puzzles, how did I handle Portal? A game based on completing puzzles to unlock the next puzzle. I loved Portal, but the difference is that the puzzles in Portal are actually a lot of fun. They make sense right from the beginning, and they're very creative. This game doesn't do much of that. There's a bit of creativity here and there, but it's not Portal level creative. And the biggest downfall of the puzzles in this game is that they just aren't fun to do. They feel like a time-consuming slog, even if you know what you're supposed to do right from the beginning, which you often don't. They put you in a room and say, okay, figure it out. Sometimes you don't even realize you're supposed to be solving a puzzle, and your progress is just halted and it looks like you've hit a dead end. The worst case of this was in this room where they put you in a pit and you can't get out. I tried everything. Some of this stuff looked like you might be able to jump onto it, but then those platforms don't lead anywhere, in any realm. I even reloaded the game because I thought I made a mistake. It took me an hour to realize that if you go behind these gears here, one of these blocks can be moved. You're supposed to use that block and jam the gears. Just in case any game developers are watching and want to incorporate puzzles, that was not obvious. In Portal, they make the end goal pretty obvious. I need to get all 3 lasers into all 3 receptors. Then they let you figure out how to do that. So yeah, by the end of the game where you have to slog through these confusing, and not in a good way, puzzles over and over and over again, I was pretty fed up with it. But honestly, if that's the only bad thing about this game, that's pretty good. So that's pretty much it. A really memorable and good game. The dialogue and music are fantastic, the world is very atmospheric and just a cool place to see. Fun boss fights and the setup for one of the most mind-boggling series in gaming history. After playing it, it's easy to see why so many people want a sequel. And I believe we'll eventually get one, but I really only want a sequel if Amy Hennig is working on it. She's the brains behind this whole thing. And I also want Kurt Harlan back to do the music. It's definitely a product of the 90s, and I think we need more of it. Alright, stay tuned for the next one in the series, the one that shook things up, Soul Reaver 2.
What news of the Riddermark?